I woke up that January morning to the sound of snowmobile engines tearing through the winter silence behind my house in Eagle River, Wisconsin, and knew immediately something was very wrong. My name is Nathan Olson, and I had moved to this 5-acre property 3 years ago specifically for the peace and quiet it offered. The land stretched from County Road B all the way back to the tree line that bordered the national forest. When I bought it, the real estate agent assured me the HOA for Pine Ridge Estates, the development that sat to my north, had no jurisdiction over my property since I was grandfathered in before they incorporated. I pulled on my boots and winter coat, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The temperature had to be around 15 degrees, and my breath came out in clouds. Following the sound of the engines, I trudged through the knee-deep snow toward the back section of my property. What I saw made my blood boil despite the cold. A freshly groomed snowmobile trail cut straight across my land, maybe 20 feet wide, with orange markers staked every 50 feet or so. The trail connected what appeared to be two sections of the Pine Ridge HOA property, using my land as a convenient shortcut to access the national forest trails beyond. I stood there in disbelief, watching 3 snowmobiles zip past me like I was invisible. One of the riders even waved at me cheerfully before disappearing into the trees. They had no idea they were trespassing. Back at the house, I immediately started digging through my property documents. Sure enough, my deed was crystal clear. I owned every square foot from the road to the forest boundary. There was no easement, no right-of-way, nothing that gave anyone permission to cross my property, let alone build a recreational trail on it. I called the HOA office that afternoon. A woman answered on the third ring. Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, this is Brenda speaking. Hi, I am Nathan Olson. I own the property at 8847 County Road B. I need to speak to someone about the snowmobile trail you have built across my land without permission. There was a pause. Oh, you must be talking about the new winter recreation corridor. Let me transfer you to our president, Margaret Whitfield. After being on hold for what felt like an eternity listening to some awful instrumental music, a sharp voice came on the line. This is Margaret Whitfield. I understand you are calling about the winter trail. I am calling about the unauthorized trail that has been built on my private property without my permission, I said, keeping my voice level despite my frustration. Mr. Olson, the trail was approved by the HOA board last month. It provides essential access for our residents to reach the county trail system. Surely you can understand the community benefit. What I understand is that it is on my land. I never gave permission for this. Margaret's tone turned condescending. Well, if you had bothered to attend any of our community meetings, you would have known about it. We sent notices to all affected parties. I am not part of your HOA. Your community meetings have nothing to do with me. The trail has been approved and installed according to all proper procedures, she said firmly. I suggest you review the community guidelines. Good day, Mr. Olson. She hung up before I could respond. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching property law in Wisconsin. The information I found was encouraging. Without an easement or my explicit permission, they were absolutely trespassing. Building a trail without my consent was a clear violation of my property rights. The next morning, I called a property lawyer in Rhinelander named David Schultz. I explained the situation during our phone consultation, and he agreed to take the case. This is pretty straightforward, David said. They have no legal right to use your property. I will draft a cease and desist letter today and send it certified mail. That starts the paper trail we will need. What if they ignore it? Then we file for an injunction and possibly sue for damages. But most HOAs back down once they realize they are in the wrong. They have insurance companies and lawyers who will tell them to cut their losses. The cease and desist letter went out that Friday. By Monday, I received a response, but not from Margaret. Instead, a woman named Karen Pemberton knocked on my door at 8 in the morning. She was exactly what I expected when I opened the door. Mid-50s, with a severe blonde bob and expensive ski gear that looked like it had never touched actual snow. She held a clipboard and wore an expression that suggested I was a minor inconvenience in her otherwise perfect day. "Mr. Olson, I am Karen Pemberton, Vice President of the Pine Ridge HOA Board. We need to discuss this ridiculous cease and desist letter." "There is nothing to discuss. You built on my property without permission." "We are trying to be neighborly here," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The trail benefits everyone, including you. You get groomed access to the National Forest trails. I do not own a snowmobile." Her smile tightened. "Well, perhaps you should consider the greater good of the community." "I am not part of your community. This is my land." Karen's pleasant facade cracked. "You know what your problem is. You are selfish. All of our residents paid into the winter recreation fund. We spent over $40,000 getting that trail properly groomed and marked. You cannot just shut it down because of some petty property dispute." "It is not petty. It is the law." "We will see what our lawyers say about that," she snapped, turning on her heel and marching back to her pristine white SUV. David called me that afternoon. "I got an interesting email from the HOA's legal counsel. They are claiming they have an implied easement based on historical use of the land." "Historical use? I have owned this place for 3 years, and nobody has ever used it as a trail." "That is what I told them. They are grasping at straws. The previous owner confirmed in writing that no trails existed on the property during his ownership either. I tracked him down this morning." "So what happens now?" "They have until the end of the week to remove all trail markers and signage and to notify their residents that the trail is closed. If they do not comply, we go to court." The week came and went. Not only did the HOA refuse to remove the markers, but they actually added more. When I walked the property line on Saturday, I discovered they had installed 2 benches along the trail and a small warming shelter near the forest edge, all on my land. I took photographs of everything, documenting each new addition. My anger was building, but David cautioned patience. "This actually helps us," he explained. "Every improvement they make strengthens our case for damages. They are willfully trespassing after being officially notified. A judge is going to have a field day with this." That Sunday, I counted over 50 snowmobiles using the trail. Some stopped at the warming shelter, and I watched from my back window as they enjoyed hot chocolate and snacks, completely oblivious to the fact they were on private property. On Monday morning, I found a notice taped to my front door. It was from the Pine Ridge HOA, informing me that I was in violation of community standards for having unapproved fencing on my property. The letter threatened daily fines of $50 until I removed a small chicken wire fence I had installed around my garden 3 years ago. I called David immediately. "Can they do this? I am not even in their HOA." "No, they absolutely cannot. This is harassment, and it is going into our lawsuit. They are retaliating against you for asserting your property rights. Save that notice." The situation escalated quickly after that. On Tuesday, someone filed a complaint with the county about my property, claiming I was operating an illegal junkyard. A county inspector showed up Wednesday afternoon, looking apologetic. "Mr. Olson, I have to follow up on all complaints, but I can already see this is nonsense," he said, looking around at my neat property. You have some firewood stacked, some tools in your shed, nothing even remotely close to a junkyard. The HOA filed this, did they not? He nodded reluctantly. I cannot officially say, but the complaint came from a Margaret Whitfield. They are harassing me because I would not let them use my land. Between you and me, Pine Ridge HOA has a reputation. This is the third bogus complaint from them this month alone. He filled out some paperwork. I will file this as unfounded. If they keep making false reports, they could face penalties. Thursday brought a visit from the fire department. Another complaint, this time claiming I was burning prohibited materials. The fire marshal was even less impressed than the county inspector. Mr. Olson, do you burn anything other than clean firewood? Nothing. Just wood from trees on my property. He made a note on his tablet. I am documenting this as a malicious complaint. We take false reports seriously because they waste resources that could be needed for real emergencies. Friday afternoon, I was served with papers. The Pine Ridge HOA was suing me for interfering with established recreational facilities and seeking an injunction to prevent me from blocking access to the trail. David was actually pleased when I forwarded him the documents. This is good for us, really good. They are claiming established use, which means they have to prove it. We have documentation showing the trail was built 3 months ago. They cannot win this, and now we can countersue for harassment, trespassing, and damages. How long will this take? Could be months. But I have an idea that might speed things up. The following Monday, David filed our countersuit and also requested an emergency hearing for a temporary restraining order. He argued that the continued trespassing was causing ongoing damage to my property and that I had a right to secure my land while the case proceeded. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I started researching fencing options. If I was going to protect my property, I needed to do it right. I called several fencing companies in the area and settled on one called Northwoods Fence and Gate in Minocqua. The owner, a guy named Tom Hendricks, came out to give me an estimate. You want to fence the entire back section? He asked, looking at the survey map I had provided. Every inch of my property line where it borders the HOA land. I want it clearly marked that this is private property. Tom walked the line with me, taking measurements and photographs. This is going to run you about $25,000 for proper fencing. We can do a 6-foot privacy fence, or if you want to save money, a split rail with no trespassing signs every 20 feet. I want something they cannot claim they did not see. What do you recommend for your situation? Go with welded wire livestock fencing, 6 feet tall, with steel T-posts every 8 feet. Add a top rail for extra support. Paint it bright orange so there is no question it is there. Post no trespassing signs every 30 feet as required by Wisconsin law. That way you have both a physical barrier and clear legal notice. How long to install? This time of year with the ground frozen, it is going to take a couple weeks. But we can start right after your hearing if the judge approves. The temporary restraining order hearing arrived on a bitter cold morning in late February. The Vilas County Courthouse was a modest building in Eagle River, and I arrived with David 30 minutes early. Margaret Whitfield and Karen Pemberton showed up with their lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Gregory Walsh. They barely acknowledged me, sitting on the opposite side of the hallway and whispering among themselves. Judge Patricia Morrison called us into her courtroom at 9 sharp. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who looked like she had zero patience for frivolous cases. David presented our case first, showing the survey documents, my deed, and the timeline of the HOA's trespassing. He displayed photographs of the trail, the warming shelter, the benches, and all the signage the HOA had installed. Your Honor, this is a clear-cut case of trespassing and willful destruction of private property, David argued. Despite being served with a cease and desist, the defendants have not only continued to trespass, but have expanded their use of my client's land. Mr. Olson has the right to secure his property. Gregory Walsh stood up, his expression confident. Your Honor, the Pine Ridge HOA acted in good faith to provide recreational access for its residents. The trail uses a small portion of Mr. Olson's land, less than half an acre, and provides significant community benefit. We are prepared to offer compensation for an easement. Did you seek permission before building the trail? Judge Morrison asked. We sent notice to all affected parties. That is not what I asked. Did you obtain Mr. Olson's explicit permission to build on his property? Walsh hesitated. We believed we had an understanding based on community norms. So that is a no. Judge Morrison looked at the photographs David had submitted, and after receiving a cease and desist letter, you continued to expand the trail. The improvements were already planned, Your Honor. Mr. Walsh, I have been on the bench for 23 years, and I have seen a lot of HOA cases. This is one of the most blatant examples of overreach I have encountered. She turned to Margaret and Karen. Did either of you actually believe you had the right to build on someone else's property without permission? Margaret stood up. Your Honor, if I may, this is about more than just property rights. This is about community and being a good neighbor. Mr. Olson has refused every attempt at compromise. What compromise? I could not help but speak up. You built on my land without asking and then expected me to be grateful. Judge Morrison held up her hand. Mr. Olson, please let your attorney speak for you. She looked at Margaret. Miss Whitfield, community spirit does not override property law. You do not get to take what does not belong to you just because you think it serves a greater good. She shuffled through the papers in front of her. I am granting the temporary restraining order. The HOA must immediately cease all use of the trail, remove all structures and signage from Mr. Olson's property, and notify all residents that the trail is closed. Mr. Olson is authorized to install fencing to secure his property line. This order is effective immediately. Gregory Walsh stood up again. Your Honor, with ski season in full swing, this will create significant hardship for our residents. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before you built on land you do not own. This hearing is adjourned. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as we left the courtroom. David was grinning. That went better than I expected. Morrison is known for supporting property rights. The HOA is going to have a hard time with her. As we walked out of the courthouse, Karen Pemberton blocked my path. I hope you are proud of yourself, she hissed. You have ruined winter recreation for 200 families. No, you did that when you trespassed on my property. This is not over. We will appeal this. David stepped between us. Miss Pemberton, I suggest you stop talking before you say something that adds to the harassment case we are building. She glared at both of us before storming off. I called Tom Hendricks from Northwood's Fence that afternoon. The judge approved it. How soon can you start? I can have a crew out there tomorrow to mark the line. We will start setting posts by the end of the week. Perfect. Let's do this. The next morning, I woke up to find the warming shelter still standing on my property. The benches were still there. The trail markers remained. I called David immediately. They have 24 hours from the judge's order yesterday, he said. If they are not gone by end of business today, we go back to court tomorrow and they will be in contempt. I spent the day photographing everything, documenting that nothing had changed. At 5 in the evening, I walked the property line again. Everything was still there. At 9 the next morning, David and I were back in front of Judge Morrison. "Your Honor, the defendants have completely ignored your order," David said, presenting my time-stamped photographs. "As of last night, all structures and signage remain on my client's property." Judge Morrison looked at Gregory Walsh with barely concealed anger. "Counselor, would you care to explain why your clients are in contempt of my order?" Walsh looked uncomfortable. "Your Honor, the logistics of removing the structures in winter conditions proved more challenging than anticipated. We are working on it. You had heavy equipment to install them. You have heavy equipment to remove them. You have until noon today. If those structures are still there at 12:01, I will hold Miss Whitfield and Miss Pemberton personally in contempt, and they can explain to me why they should not spend the weekend in jail." That got their attention. Margaret and Karen, sitting in the gallery, went pale. I drove home and waited. At 10 in the morning, a truck from the HOA showed up with 4 workers and a small excavator. They dismantled the warming shelter, loaded up the benches, and pulled out every trail marker. By 11:30, my property looked like the trail had never existed, except for the compacted snow where dozens of snowmobiles had traveled. Tom Hendricks and his crew arrived the next day. They spent 2 days marking the property line with bright orange stakes and flags, making absolutely certain they were on my property and not an inch over. I did not want to give the HOA any ammunition to claim I was encroaching on their land. The fencing installation began on a Monday morning in early March. The ground was still frozen solid, which made setting the posts challenging, but Tom's crew was experienced. They brought in an auger powerful enough to drill through the frozen earth, and they worked methodically down the property line. Margaret Whitfield showed up on the second day of installation, her face red with anger. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded, marching across the snow toward where I was standing with Tom, securing my property line as authorized by Judge Morrison. "This is outrageous. You are boxing us in." Tom looked at her calmly. "Madam, we are installing this fence entirely on Mr. Olson's property. We have survey documentation showing the exact property line." "I do not care about your survey. You are deliberately blocking access that has been used by this community for 3 months," I said, "without permission, on my land. You know what you are. You are a selfish, small-minded man who does not care about anyone but himself. I care about my property rights." Karen Pemberton arrived moments later, pulling up in her SUV and jumping out. "Margaret, I got your text. What is he doing?" "He is building a fence." Karen looked at the work crew, then at me. "You cannot do this." "Actually, I can. The judge specifically authorized it. We will sue you for every penny this costs us," Karen shouted. "Do you know how much money we spent on that trail?" "About 40,000, you told me." "You should have spent 500 on a lawyer to check if you had the right to build it in the first place." Margaret pulled out her phone. "I am calling the police. This is harassment." Tom shook his head. "Madam, calling the police because someone is building a fence on their own property is a waste of their time." She called anyway. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy arrived. He was a young guy named Officer Daniels who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. "Someone reported illegal construction," he asked, looking at the fencing work. "That would be me," Margaret said. "He is building this fence specifically to harass the HOA." Officer Daniels walked over to Tom. "Do you have permits?" Tom handed him a folder. "All here. Building permit, survey showing the property line, and the court order authorizing the fence." The deputy reviewed the documents, then looked at Margaret and Karen. "Everything appears to be in order. He is allowed to fence his own property. But he is doing it to block our access." Karen protested. Your access across his private property? Madam, he has every right to do that. This is ridiculous, Margaret huffed. Come on, Karen, we will let our lawyers handle this. They left, and Officer Daniels turned to me. Just for the record, Pine Ridge HOA calls us at least twice a week with complaints. Most of them are like this, nothing situations. You are well within your rights. The fencing took 10 days to complete. When it was done, I had a 6-foot-high orange fence running the entire length of my property where it bordered the HOA land. Every 30 feet, there was a bright red no trespassing sign. It was impossible to miss and equally impossible to claim you did not see it. The fence changed everything. The HOA property to the north of me was now completely cut off from the National Forest access to the south. To get there, residents would have to drive 15 minutes around to the county access point on Highway 45, instead of just stepping out their back doors. I got my first indication of how angry this made people when I went into town for groceries. A woman I did not recognize approached me in the parking lot of the Eagle River Piggly Wiggly. "Are you Nathan Olson?" she asked. "I am. You are the one who blocked the snowmobile trail." "I fenced my own property. My kids loved that trail. They could ride right from our house. Now we have to pack everything up and drive, and by the time we get there, half the day is gone. I am sorry for the inconvenience, but it was never a legal trail to begin with." That is easy for you to say. You do not have kids begging to go snowmobiling every day. She walked away before I could respond. It was not the last time something like that happened. Over the next few weeks, I got dirty looks at the hardware store, the gas station, even at church. The HOA had done an excellent job painting me as the villain who stole their recreation trail. David called me in mid-March with an update on the lawsuit. The HOA is trying to lowball us with a settlement offer. They will pay $5,000 for damages and drop their suit if you grant them an easement for the trail. Not interested. That is what I told them. I countered with $75,000 in damages, plus they drop their suit, plus they pay all our legal fees, plus a public apology and no easement. You think they will go for it? Not yet. But once we get closer to trial, and they realize how much this is going to cost them, they will come around. Their insurance company is probably already having fits about this. The snowmobile season ended in late March as temperatures warmed and the snow began to melt. I thought the conflict might die down once there were no more riders trying to use the trail. I was wrong. In early April, I found the lock cut on my back gate and several sections of fence damaged. Someone had deliberately tried to tear down parts of the fence during the night. I called the sheriff's office and filed a report. A different deputy came out, an older guy named Sergeant Matthews. He examined the damage and took photographs. "Any idea who might have done this?" he asked. "I have a pretty good guess. I have been in a dispute with the Pine Ridge HOA. I heard about that, the snowmobile trail thing." He looked at the damaged fence. "This is criminal damage to property. You should get cameras installed out here." "I will do that today." I drove to the electronics store in Rhinelander and bought a complete security camera system. I spent the afternoon installing cameras covering every section of the fence with motion detection and night vision. They uploaded footage directly to cloud storage, so even if someone destroyed the cameras, I would have the video. The next night, the cameras caught 2 teenage boys trying to pull down more fencing. I could see them clearly in the infrared footage. They worked for about 10 minutes before giving up and leaving. I sent the footage to Sergeant Matthews. He called me back the next day. "I know these kids. They are brothers, live in Pine Ridge Estates. I will be having a conversation with them and their parents." 2 days later, a man showed up at my door. He was in his 40s, looking embarrassed and angry at the same time. "Mr. Olson, I am Derek Sanderson. My sons damaged your fence. I am here to apologize and pay for the repairs. I appreciate that. They heard people talking at the HOA meetings about how you blocked the trail. I think they got it in their heads they were doing something heroic." He handed me an envelope. "There is $2,000 in there. I hope it covers the damage. My boys will be doing community service all summer, and they wrote you an apology letter." I opened the envelope and found the cash along with handwritten letters from both boys. They actually seemed genuine. "Thank you for handling this responsibly," I said. "For what it is worth, I think the HOA was wrong to build on your land. Margaret and Karen get these ideas in their heads and just run with them. Consequences be damned." It was the first supportive comment I had received from anyone in Pine Ridge Estates, and it meant more than I expected. May brought new problems. The HOA filed 3 more complaints with the county, claiming my fence was installed incorrectly and violated setback requirements. Each complaint triggered an inspection, and each time the inspector found nothing wrong. On the 3rd inspection, the county inspector, a man named Bill Crawford, looked frustrated. "Mr. Olson, I am going to be straight with you. These complaints are harassment, pure and simple. I am documenting them as such, and I am going to recommend the county start fining Pine Ridge HOA for filing false reports." Can they do that? Absolutely. We have limited resources, and wasting inspector time on bogus complaints takes us away from legitimate issues. If this keeps up, they will face $500 per false complaint. The HOA must have gotten that message because the county complaints stopped after that, but Margaret and Karen were not done. In June, I received a letter from a local environmental group claiming my fence was blocking wildlife corridors and needed to be removed. It took me 2 days to discover that Margaret Whitfield had founded this group 3 weeks earlier specifically to target my fence. David sent them a cease and desist letter, and I never heard from them again. The case finally went to trial in July. The weather had turned beautiful, with warm sunshine and clear skies, making the Snowmobile trail dispute seem almost absurd. But the legal issues were dead serious. The trial took 2 full days. David presented overwhelming evidence of the HOA's trespassing, the damage to my property, and the harassment I had endured. He showed the timeline of complaints, the vandalism, everything. Gregory Walsh tried to argue that the HOA had acted reasonably based on historical use patterns in the area, but he could not produce a single piece of evidence showing any legal right to my land. His case fell apart under David's cross-examination. Margaret Whitfield took the stand and was a disaster for the HOA's case. When David asked her why she did not seek my permission before building the trail, she responded, "We did not think we needed permission. It was just a small section of land, and he was not using it for anything." "So you believed you could take someone else's property just because they were not actively using it?" David asked. "That is not what I meant." "But that is what you did. You saw land you wanted to use, you did not bother to check who owned it or ask permission, and you built on it anyway." "We were trying to benefit the community." By breaking the law, Judge Morrison had heard enough. After closing arguments on the 2nd day, she took less than an hour to return with her verdict. "I find in favor of the plaintiff, Nathan Olson. The Pine Ridge Homeowners Association willfully trespassed on Mr. Olson's property, built structures without permission, and continued to do so even after being legally notified to cease. Furthermore, the evidence of harassment through false complaints and retaliation is deeply concerning." She awarded me $65,000 in damages, plus all legal fees, and issued a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from accessing my property for any reason. She also ordered the HOA to issue a public apology to be printed in the local paper. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued, I am forwarding information about the false complaints filed by the HOA to the county prosecutor's office. Filing false reports with county agencies may constitute a criminal offense. Margaret and Karen looked shocked. Gregory Walsh tried to object, but the judge cut him off. This behavior cannot be tolerated. HOAs serve an important function in communities, but they are not above the law. This association showed a blatant disregard for property rights and then attempted to punish Mr. Olson for defending those rights. They need to face consequences. The courtroom cleared, and I stood outside with David in the summer sunshine, feeling like a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders. That was about as total a victory as you can get, David said. The HOA's insurance will have to pay the judgment, and the board members might face personal liability if the insurance does not cover willful misconduct. What about the criminal charges Morrison mentioned? That is up to the prosecutor. Filing false government reports is a misdemeanor in Wisconsin. If they can prove Margaret and Karen knowingly filed false complaints, they could face fines or even jail time. The public apology appeared in the Eagle River News Review the following week. It was a small notice that basically admitted the HOA had trespassed and violated my property rights. Not exactly heartfelt, but it was something. The real fallout came at the next Pine Ridge HOA board meeting. I did not attend, but Derek Sanderson, the father of the boys who had damaged my fence, called to tell me what happened. It was chaos, he said. Half the residents wanted to recall the entire board. Margaret tried to defend her actions, but people were furious about the judgment. Our HOA fees are going up $300 per household to cover the legal costs, since the insurance would not pay for willful trespassing. What happened? Margaret and Karen both resigned. The board is being completely restructured. People are calling it the wake-up call Pine Ridge needed. The board had been operating like a dictatorship for years, and this finally broke it open. In August, the Vilas County District Attorney's Office filed misdemeanor charges against Margaret Whitfield and Karen Pemberton for filing false government reports. The charges covered the 3 bogus county complaints and the false environmental complaint. The case went to trial in September. I had to testify about the timeline of events and the harassment I had experienced. Margaret's lawyer tried to argue that she genuinely believed the complaints were valid, but the prosecutor presented evidence showing she had discussed using complaints as retaliation in HOA board emails. Both women were convicted and sentenced to 30 days in jail, suspended pending 1 year of probation, plus community service and fines. The judge also ordered them to personally apologize to me in court. Karen went first. Mr. Olson, I apologize for my actions. I let my emotions get the better of me, and I behaved inappropriately. She sounded like she was reading from a script, but I nodded acceptance. Margaret was more difficult. She stood up, looked at me with barely concealed resentment, and said, I apologize for filing complaints without proper verification. It was not really an apology, but the judge accepted it. As we left the courthouse, Margaret caught up to me in the parking lot. I hope you are happy, she said bitterly. You have destroyed everything we built in Pine Ridge. No, you did that when you decided property law did not apply to you. All of this over a stupid piece of land. We would have paid you for an easement. You should have asked before you built. That is how property rights work. She walked away, and I never spoke to her again. The settlement money came through in October. After paying David's fees, I had about $40,000 left. I used $10,000 to upgrade the fence and add better gates. The rest I put toward paying off my mortgage early. Life slowly returned to normal. The new Pine Ridge HOA board sent me a formal letter in November, apologizing for the previous board's actions and assuring me they would respect my property rights. They asked if I would be willing to consider granting an easement for a trail, with proper compensation and legal documentation. I thought about it for a few days before responding. In the end, I declined. The conflict had left a bad taste in my mouth, and I did not want to deal with trail traffic, maintenance issues, or the possibility of future disputes. My property was finally peaceful and private, exactly what I had wanted when I moved here. Some people in town still gave me cold looks when I went out, but most had moved on to other things. Derek Sanderson became a friendly acquaintance, occasionally stopping by to chat when he saw me working outside. He kept me updated on the changes in Pine Ridge. "The new board is completely different," he told me one afternoon in December. "They actually follow proper procedures now. No more of Margaret's little kingdom. People are even saying the HOA is becoming what it should have been all along." Winter came again, bringing snow and cold, and I occasionally heard distant snowmobile engines from the county trail system. But my property remained quiet and undisturbed. The orange fence stood solid along my property line, a clear reminder of boundaries and rights. On Christmas Eve, I got an unexpected visitor. A young woman knocked on my door, introducing herself as Jennifer Patterson, a reporter from the Rhinelander Daily News. "Mr. Olson, I am writing a story about HOA overreach in Wisconsin. Your case has become somewhat famous in property rights circles. Would you be willing to talk about what happened?" I invited her in and spent an hour recounting the entire saga. She took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions. "What would you say to other property owners facing similar situations?" she asked. "Document everything. Know your property rights. Do not be intimidated by HOAs that think they can do whatever they want. The law is on your side if you are willing to stand up for yourself." Any regrets about how you handled it? I thought about that. Not really. Could I have tried harder to compromise? Maybe. But they never asked for permission in the first place. They just took what they wanted and expected me to accept it. Sometimes you have to draw a line. The article came out in early January, a full-page story about HOA conflicts in northern Wisconsin. My case was the centerpiece, but Jennifer had found several other examples of HOA overreach, from architectural control disputes to improper fee assessments. The story got picked up by the Associated Press and ran in papers across the state. I got calls from property rights advocacy groups, other homeowners facing HOA problems, even a producer from a local TV station wanting to do a segment. I politely declined most of them. I had never wanted to be the face of a movement. I just wanted to be left alone on my own land. By February, the attention had mostly died down. I focused on my normal life, working my remote IT job during the day and enjoying the winter scenery in the evenings. The snowmobile season was in full swing again, but the trails stayed where they belonged, on public land and properties where permission had been granted. On Valentine's Day, I got a letter from the new Pine Ridge HOA president, a woman named Susan Morris. She wrote to tell me that the association had installed a new trail system entirely within their own property boundaries, connecting to the county trails through a properly negotiated easement with a different landowner. She thanked me, oddly enough, for forcing the HOA to do things correctly. "Your case taught us an important lesson," she wrote. "Following the law is not just about avoiding trouble. It is about respecting other people and building trust in the community. The previous board forgot that. We will not make the same mistake. I appreciated the letter. It felt like genuine closure. Spring came early that year, with warm weather melting the snow by mid-March. I spent my weekends preparing my garden for planting, repairing some siding on my house, and generally enjoying my property. Every time I looked at that orange fence, I felt a sense of satisfaction. It was not spite or revenge. It was simply the knowledge that I had defended what was mine. Derek Sanderson stopped by one Saturday in April while I was working in the yard. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what is up?" "The new HOA board wants to do something to make amends. They have been brainstorming ideas. One suggestion was to name the new trail system after you." I laughed. "Please do not do that." That is what I told them, but they are serious about wanting to make things right. Any ideas? I thought about it. Tell them to take the money they would spend on a plaque or whatever and donate it to the county's land conservation program, something that actually helps preserve property and nature in the area. "That is a good idea. I will pass it along." He left, and I went back to my work. The afternoon was peaceful, with birds singing and a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. This was exactly what I had wanted when I moved here. No drama, no conflict, just the quiet satisfaction of being on my own land, secure in my rights and boundaries. Looking back on everything that had happened, from that first morning hearing snowmobiles on my property to the trials and judgments and eventual resolution, I realized the whole situation could have been avoided with a single conversation. If Margaret Whitfield or Karen Pemberton had knocked on my door before breaking ground on that trail, if they had explained what they wanted to do and asked for permission, we might have worked something out. But that would have required seeing me as a person with rights rather than an obstacle to be worked around. It would have required following the law instead of assuming they were above it. And it would have required basic human decency and respect. The HOA had learned an expensive lesson. $65,000 in damages, tens of thousands more in legal fees, criminal charges for their board members, and a shattered reputation in the community. All because they could not be bothered to ask permission before taking what was not theirs. Summer rolled in with hot, humid days and thunderstorms that watered my garden. I had tomatoes thriving in raised beds, cucumbers climbing their trellises, and peppers producing more than I could eat. I gave away bags of vegetables to Derek and a few other neighbors who had been friendly during the conflict. In July, the local newspaper ran a follow-up article about HOA reforms in Wisconsin. Several state legislators were proposing new laws to increase oversight of HOA boards and provide easier legal recourse for property owners. My case was cited as an example of why such reforms were needed. I did not want to be a poster child for anything, but if something good came from my experience, I could live with that. August brought the annual Eagle River Town Fair. I had skipped it the previous year, not wanting to deal with potential confrontations. This year, I decided to go. I figured enough time had passed that people had moved on. The fair was crowded with families enjoying carnival rides, livestock exhibits, and craft booths. I was looking at some woodworking displays when I spotted Karen Pemberton standing near the food vendors. Our eyes met briefly. She looked away and walked in the other direction. I did not chase after her or try to talk. There was nothing left to say. She had faced consequences for her actions, and that was enough for me. Later that evening, I ran into Susan Morris, the new HOA president, at the beer tent. "Mr. Olson," she said, smiling warmly. "Good to see you out and about. Good to be out. How are things at Pine Ridge, honestly?" "Better than ever. The membership is more engaged, we are following proper procedures, and people trust the board again. It took your situation to wake us all up to how badly things had gotten. I am glad something positive came from it. We made that donation you suggested, by the way. $5,000 to the county land conservation program. They were thrilled. That was generous. It was the least we could do. She hesitated, then continued. I know some people gave you a hard time during all of that. I want you to know that a lot of us understood you were in the right. We were just afraid to speak up against Margaret and Karen. That is on us. I appreciate you saying that. We talked for a few more minutes before parting ways. The conversation left me feeling better about the whole situation. The community was healing, the HOA was functioning properly, and life was moving forward. Fall arrived with spectacular foliage, the maple and oak trees around my property turning brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold. I spent October mornings drinking coffee on my back porch, watching deer move through the woods and listening to the sounds of nature. On Halloween, I got a surprise. A group of kids from Pine Ridge Estates came trick-or-treating at my house, something that had never happened before. Their parents waited at the end of my driveway, waving apologetically. I loaded the kids up with full-size candy bars I had bought just in case, and they left happy. It was a small thing, but it felt like acceptance. I was no longer the villain who had ruined their snowmobile trail. I was just a neighbor. Thanksgiving came and went quietly. I had dinner with some friends in Rhinelander, enjoying turkey and good conversation. When someone asked about the HOA situation, I gave a brief summary and moved on. It was part of my past now, not something that defined me. December brought the first major snowfall, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. I shoveled my driveway, stocked up on firewood, and settled in for the cold months ahead. I could hear snowmobiles on the distant county trails, but my property remained silent and undisturbed. On Christmas morning, I found a package on my front porch. Inside was a handmade wooden sign with my property coordinates and the words "Private Property Boundaries Respected" carved into it. There was a note from Derek Sanderson. Made this in my workshop. Thought you might appreciate it. Thanks for teaching all of us an important lesson. Merry Christmas. I hung the sign on my garage where it joined my other decorations. It was a perfect reminder of everything that had happened and everything that had been resolved. As the year came to a close, I reflected on the journey. It had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming to defend my property rights. There were moments when I had questioned whether it was worth the fight. But standing on my land, looking at the fence that marked clear boundaries, I knew I had made the right choice. Property rights matter. Boundaries matter. And sometimes, standing up for what is right means being willing to fight, even when it is uncomfortable and unpopular. The HOA had learned that lesson the hard way. Margaret Whitfield and Karen Pemberton had paid a personal price for their arrogance. And the Pine Ridge community had emerged stronger and more aware of the importance of following the law. As for me, I had my peace and quiet back. My 5 acres remained mine, undisturbed and secure. The orange fence stood as a testament to the power of individual property rights, and I had no regrets about building it. New Year's Eve arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. I stood outside at midnight, watching fireworks in the distance, and felt grateful. Grateful for good lawyers like David Schultz, who knew how to defend property rights. Grateful for judges like Patricia Morrison, who upheld the law. And grateful for my stubborn refusal to back down when I knew I was right. The snowmobile trail that had caused so much conflict was now just a memory, buried under snow and time. In its place was clarity, proper boundaries, and mutual respect between neighbors. That was worth more than any shortcut through the woods could ever be. I went inside, poured myself a whiskey, and toasted the new year. Whatever challenges it might bring, I would face them on my own terms, on my own land, with my rights secure and my boundaries clear. That was all I had ever wanted, and now I finally had it.